To preface this review, I'd like to mention my history on everything The Last of Us. Now, more specifically with Neil Druckmann, I really liked his writing between The Last of Us Part 1 and his writing and direction style in Uncharted 4: Thief's End. Between those events in gaming history, those two are some of my all-time favorite games ever created, and partly due to Neil Druckmann being part 1 of The Last of Us, and mostly in Uncharted 4, considering he was the writer and director of Uncharted 4. Somewhere between 2015 to 2020, he shit the bed in his writing skill department, and he kind of just ended up as a hack writer, because not only did The Last of Us Part 2 release, and it was an abomination mostly, but even before that, to the lead up of its release, he misled everybody completely intentionally. And honestly, if it weren't for the visuals and whatnot of Part 2, just on that alone, I would have given Part 2 a 0 out of 10, just because of how big of a mislead all of the advertising and marketing and trailers were for The Last of Us Part 2. Now, I do still respect the man for being part of the masterpiece of The Last of Us Part 1, and especially Uncharted 4, because Uncharted 4 is basically about families, and while family stories are quite cliche nowadays, I think his writing was extremely well done for Uncharted 4, and his direction was really well focused in the game. Now, what I can say to preface that preface is Last of Us Part 1, perfection. Uncharted 4: Thief's End, perfection. The Last of Us Part 2, I liked the technical parts of the game. Mainly just the visuals, and I'll even give him a nod towards Ellie's part of the story, which is about 4 hours of the 16-hour story. I did like what he wrote for Ellie in Last of Us Part 2, but outside of the visuals and Ellie, The Last of Us Part 2 was a complete woke abomination. Now, fast forward another 3 years later, we finally get the HBO adaptation for the first game, The Last of Us. And to be honest, how I always watch and review shows nowadays, I don't watch them weekly. I wait until they fully release if they're not on Netflix, and then I binge the entire season or series the very day that the finale is airing that night. So, yesterday, I spent an entire day watching 9 full episodes of The Last of Us simultaneously. And I will say, to start, for the positives, Pedro Pascal and Bella Ramsey and all other supporting actors and actresses, they all do remarkable jobs for what they're given. They are really good doing their jobs in The Last of Us. I don't have any complaints as far as anybody involved inside of the show. Acting, even the directions, the visuals, the practical effects department, everything looks gripping. Everything is done very well. Hell, even the environment in the show is very reminiscent of the video game. Another big positive is the last 3 episodes of the series are just basically pitch perfect to the video game, The Last of Us, and its DLC prequel, Left Behind. So, to explain further, Episode 7 is the Left Behind prequel story, and then 8 and 9 are, I'd say, the last 4 to 5 hours of The Last of Us' story. Now is when I have to go to the duds of this show, and there are a lot, a shit ton. I started my review with The Last of Us saying all the positives that I could, because they are really good, really big positives, but there are so many more negatives. The number one, first biggest negative of The Last of Us TV show is the fact that the co-writer and sometimes director of The Last of Us is literally the co-writer of The Last of Us video game. And that should have just, boom, that should have been a perfect show right from the get-go. No! What do we fucking get? We get a bunch of retconning from Neil Druckmann to replace all of the shit that Bruce Straley had the ideas for The Last of Us' story and implemented Neil Druckmann's own woke-ass brain children. Prime example, Bill in Billstown. Now, while I did really strongly appreciate his introduction in episode 3 because he actually did act, look, and feel like Bill from the game, Nick Offerman did a remarkable job. No matter what the story went through, he did a remarkable job as the Bill character. The problem I have is that Neil Druckmann just said fucking whatever to The Last of Us' original story and made his own stupid woke romance story set in the past leading up to events in the current. And I don't have an issue with gayness. I don't have an issue with gay pride. I do have an issue when you substitute an actually really well done story and well written story with cliche, bottom of the barrel relationship story. And literally Bill's story in The Last of Us is that just of a romance story leading up to dying. That is literally his story. He doesn't even meet Ellie, he doesn't even meet Joel, and that's the fine line that I have with the show. Especially episode 3, where there was such witty dialogue between Bill and Ellie, just because they were basically the complete opposite kind of characters. We don't have any of that shit in The Last of Us TV show. Now granted, the writing in The Last of Us works really well with dialogue because most times Neil Druckmann literally implemented the dialogue writing from the game into the show directly, and you can tell. But outside of that, Neil Druckmann just retcons everything that was not his own thing. My guess is, like the Left Behind episode, for example, my guess is that his brainchild was the Left Behind DLC story because Left Behind in the game was a perfect prequel story. In the show, completely perfect adaptation, and it worked well. But that's what I'm getting at. It just seems like everything that Neil Druckmann wasn't exactly part of in the game, he just completely took away from in the show and redacted and substituted it with his own writing style, which is fine. Honestly, I would actually kind of appreciate if they remade part 1 and have it like The Last of Us part Neil or something, and then actually adapt the show into his own part 1 version of the game. Because The Last of Us TV show, even though it does look and even feel like the game, it's not the game at all. And that's because of Neil Druckmann. That's because, I don't know why, I guess ever since he started getting in cahoots with Anita Sarkeesian or whatever her name is, he just turned into a woke simp. And he was adding just completely unnecessary, redundant characters, like Melanie Linsky's character, for example. In episode 5, I believe. I don't have an issue with her as an actress. I really like her acting. What I have an issue with is that the world inside of The Last of Us is so brutal that women oftentimes don't survive. But then in the TV show, she's a big badass leader that talks like this, and every strong-ass man follows her even though she just talks like this. It didn't make any fucking sense whatsoever. Again, I like the actress, hated the writing, and I hated the story for her acting. The same episode with Sam and Henry, what Neil Druckmann did to Sam and Henry's characters just made no sense to the original story. And like I said, I would appreciate his own version of the story events inside of his own game, but unfortunately, The Last of Us is based off of the original fucking game, and he fucked it up completely. I watched most of the series with my friend, and even he was pointing out, because he already knew what was coming in episode 3, he was pointing out between episodes 1 and 2, they were actually implementing pre-existing plot points that were in Billstown way before they get to Billstown, because they were leading up to the bullshit that they implemented into the TV show. That way it could still make sense, even though they're still completely ruining the original story. And no matter how you feel about this review, objectively, the original story is completely demolished in the TV show. Like, you cannot argue about that. You can say you like or dislike the new direction, better or worse, and that's fine. But objectively, the TV show is not the same story as the game. There are a lot of little trinkles inside of the show that really compares strongly to the game, but it's not the full-on original story. Like I said, episodes 7, 8, and 9 are basically pitch perfect to the story, and I am glad for that. But before that, they added in so many unnecessary things, unnecessary characters, and they completely took away all of the intelligence within the game's writing and characters. Another big negative I have against the show: Joel, in part 1 at least, is super smart, especially with surviving. Okay, in the game, he literally looks around every corner, he looks around every crevice. He's always in survival mode. In the show, Pedro Pascal, great actor. I am not at all criticizing his acting. I am criticizing the direction and the writing. But Pedro Pascal's Joel was fucking retarded. He was stupid. Literally, he would see a zombie and running after him, and his first thought is, oh, I'm going to pick up my gun, shoot them in the stomach, and let that be it. Well, okay, does exactly that. It stumbles. Well, it doesn't do shit. Everybody knows zombies, head. Everybody. Even your mentally challenged brother, sister, uncle, niece, whatever, even they know a zombie has to have a headshot. Great, so a minute later, Pedro Pascal's Joel shoots the zombie in the head. Great. Excellent. What does he do right after that? Empties the fucking barrel of the gun into the zombie. 6 rounds right into the zombie's head. Turns around. That same horde of zombies behind that one zombie is still coming after them. Oh my god. The intelligent writing right there. Like, I don't even have to explain how fucking stupid that is. That's another big negative. It's just, Joel in the TV show is just stupid. He honestly is not Joel from the game. He's just borderline retarded. And that's another big negative. I sat through 9 fucking episodes yesterday of The Last of Us TV series. It took 6.5 episodes, I would say, to finally feel some kind of connection, some kind of bond between Joel and Ellie. Even though the entire story is set around following them in their adventure. It took 6 or 7 fucking episodes to finally feel a connection with them, between them. Now, granted, by the end of the show, you do feel a connection. It works well at the very end, but at the very end, it also feels forced, kind of rushed, because you didn't really get shit from them, between them, throughout the first 2 acts of the season. It all felt jarring, the fact that the first 2 acts of the TV show were so inaccurate that the 3rd act of the season felt so accurate, but it just felt so rushed and forced because of the inaccuracies that led to that. Anyway, that's really all I have to say about The Last of Us TV series. Honestly, I told my friend yesterday that I was sitting on a 6 out of 10, and that was at the start of episode 6. So that's giving it the benefit of the doubt, but watching throughout the whole entire series and the season, and not just all of the woke disasters in the writing, but just the jarring pacing and tone between all of the acts together. Overall, honestly, for me, The Last of Us Season 1 to me, is a 4 out of 10. 5 being just an average. Basically, all they had to do to get a 5 was write it the same as the original. And then I would have given it, hell, even a 10 out of 10 if the performances in the TV series were the same. Just the writing should have been the exact same as the game. It was not at all, not at least up until the very fucking end. And then it just didn't feel earned at all. So, for Neil Druckmann's career at least, The Last of Us Part 1, I love. Uncharted 4, I love. Last of Us Part 2, meh at the very most. Honestly, I hate that game. I played through it once, and I haven't even felt the urge to replay it at all. And I've replayed some shitty games in my time as a gamer. And now there's The Last of Us, which I don't hate, but there's just so many problems that could have been easily avoided if Neil Druckmann just stuck to the fucking source material. So once again, Hollywood shit the bed. And here, I was really excited because last year we got the Uncharted film, which it wasn't perfect, but it was a pretty damn good adaptation of the Uncharted game series. Unfortunately, The Last of Us is not the same. The Last of Us is pure garbage writing, in the sense of retconning shit that wasn't Neil Druckmann's. My guess is he's a giant narcissist. So, again, overall for me, The Last of Us Season 1 is a 4 out of 10 that I will not be rewatching. In fact, it is encouraging me to go and replay The Last of Us Part 1 on my PS4 Pro. So thank you.